Yo, what's going on, y'all? So as you can probably tell, I just came from the gym. So getting gains. She. But I'm feeling inspired to talk about what's called Purusha and Prakriti in Hinduism and Buddhism. More prevalently in Hinduism. And I want to start this by suggesting that you read a particular book within Hinduism and the Hindu scriptures. Hinduism is a bit more complex than Christianity and Judaism and Islam, where Christianity has and Judaism have the Holy Bible, and Islam has the Quran. So they both have one text each. Hinduism has many texts, but you can consider the most popular text that they have is what's called the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita. So I know that's a little difficult or complicated, but just try to search that up, and this will provide you a simplified read-along, if you'd like, while you watch this video, or to read on your own after you finish watching this video. And that's going to help you to understand what we're going to touch on here in this video a little bit better. And basically in that book, where in Christianity, Jesus is the incarnation of God, which means God becomes a man, and he teaches about God himself, basically. It's the same thing with this book, the Bhagavad Gita. You have a man named Krishna. He's the incarnation of God. God has become a man to teach humanity of himself, essentially, to reveal himself to humanity. All right. So here in Hinduism and Buddhism, we have Purusha and Prakriti. And at its most general, Purusha and Prakriti means the subjective and the objective. We could say subject and object, which means experiencer and experienced, or most generally, knower and known. To use an analogy to have something to visualize this, consider this the distinction between heads and tails, Purusha and Prakriti. Subject and object, consider this like dreamer and dream, as the experiencer and the experienced, the knower and the known as the subjective and the objective. At its most general, the subjective and the objective is Purusha and Prakriti, okay? In our modern Western language, we would best simplify this as mind and matter, but to the average person, it might be a bit more familiar to distinguish this as spirit and matter. And we're going to get into why in a second, okay? And so let's use another common theme when it comes to the structure of a human being that many people may be familiar with. Typically, in a simplified way, in a generalized way, a human being is broken down into a spirit, a mind, and a body, which is true in one perspective, but in another perspective, we can say the same exact thing in a different way, where instead of saying spirit, mind, and body, what we're actually saying is mind, brain, and body. Okay? Now, starting with the first perspective, spirit, mind, and body. The spiritual is Purusha. Purusha is the spiritual, and the mental and physical, the mind and body, is Prakriti. The spirit as the spiritual is Purusha. The mind and body as the mental and physical is Prakriti. Okay, so Purusha in science we would consider to be the observer, and Prakriti is the observed. So Prakriti means the totality of the material universe. Everything that you experience objective to yourself as an object to yourself, as something other than yourself. So all of the immaterial objects inside of the brain, the mental, and all of the material objects outside of the body, the physical, is all Prakriti, the mental and physical, as the immaterial and material objective totality of objective experience. The object of one's experience as the material universe. And then opposite that, we have the spirit as oneself, the material being appearing as the material universe, the dreamer dreaming the dream. Okay, and this is where we can step into the opposite, not necessarily opposite, but other perspective. So the perspective that I just provided you there is where we're coming from the perspective that the mind is just the brain. Okay, now this is what we would call psychology here in modern Western America and in modern Western language. And it is, but it's not all of psychology. Because here in modern Western America, we only understand the mind as the brain. And that's like understanding, if we use the analogy of a tree, that's like understanding the tree as just the branch. But what about the trunk? You can't understand the mind as just the brain and not the universe. So the tree is unified as the trunk and individualized as the branch. The mind is unified as the universe and individualized as the brain, and then materialized as the body, where the body is the fruit hanging off the tree of life. The tree of life is the mind of God. The universe is the dream of life and the mind of God, which means God is everywhere, everyone, and everything. Everything is an emanation of God. Everyone is an incarnation of God, because the universe is a manifestation of God as a vision in the mind, which means a materialization of oneself, which is what we can call either absolute idealism, which means only mind, only the mind, or extreme theism, which means only God, because the mind of God is the mind as God, because the mind is God. God is the mind. So absolute idealism as only mind is extreme theism as only God, which is mysticism, as what we could consider a form of spirituality. And at its core, spirituality is a form of psychology, because the mind is the universe. Spirituality is the study of the universe, which is also called either metaphysics or cosmology. Metaphysics is the study of reality, which is the same thing as cosmology, which is the study of the universe, which is spirituality in a fancy way, where metaphysics is cosmology as spirituality, because reality is the universe as the spirit, which is the mind, because the mind is the universe. So it's all the same thing. It's like branches to the trunk. So we're talking about the same thing in a bunch of different ways. Whether we say metaphysics, cosmology, spirituality, it's all psychology. It's all psychology. Okay? So when we've provided that little bit of context, that's where we can now step into the next perspective, which is actually a bit more accurate here, where Purusha is not the spiritual, and Prakriti is not the mental and physical. Now we can see that's where we're coming from, the perspective that the mind is just the brain. Now let's switch it, and let's come from the perspective the mind is the universe. Now what we would call the spiritual before is the mental. And what we would call the mental before is the neural. And then we still have the physical. So where before we had Purusha and Prakriti as the subjective and the objective, the spiritual and the mental/physical, now we have Purusha and Prakriti as the subjective and the objective being the mental, opposite the neural and physical. So before it was the spiritual opposite the mental and physical. Now we have the psychological opposite the neurological and physical. The mental opposite the neural and physical is what before we were calling the spiritual opposite the mental and physical. So it depends. Are you coming from the perspective the mind is the universe or the mind is the brain? Well, as we can see, as we saw before, there's only one correct perspective here, because the branch is the trunk as the tree of life. The brain is the universe as the mind of God. The tree is the trunk first, and then it's individualized as the branch. The mind is the universe first, and then it's individualized as the brain second. So it's more fundamentally accurate to come not from the first perspective, but from the second perspective. So it's no longer correct to consider that Purusha and Prakriti as the subjective and the objective is the spiritual opposite the mental and physical. Now we know it's actually Purusha and Prakriti, the subjective and the objective, as the mental opposite the neural and physical, which is what we could consider the metaphysical opposite the physical. The immaterial and material objective, subtle and gross, is the polarity of the objective. And then there's the singularity of the subjective, right, as oneself, the subject, I am. And then there's the rest of objective experience as the material universe, where the mind, Purusha, is the mind as oneself, the immaterial being, appearing as all of Prakriti, the material universe, which we are reducing to the neural and physical as the brain and body. So all of the immaterial objects inside of the brain is the neural, and all of the material objects outside of the body is the physical, which is either way the subtle and the gross, the immaterial and material objective experience of the material universe, which is reduced to the neural and physical, brain and body. And then there's oneself as the immaterial being, which is the mind, the subject, as the experiencer of this experience, the knower of everything known, the subject of this subjective experience, okay? The dreamer dreaming the dream of life, all right? So Purusha and Prakriti as the subjective and objective is actually the mental versus the neural and physical, the subjective and the subtle and gross objective, where the subjective is a singularity, the objective is a polarity, all right? The objective is the polarity of subtle and gross, immaterial and material, which is all objective experience as the objective universe, okay? And then there's the subjective mind as the immaterial being, not the individual brain, but the immaterial being, which is experiencing the individual brain, body, and objective universe. And that's what's called the field in Christianity, as Jesus called it, as well as what Krishna also called the field, which is what we call in quantum physics the objective universe, the quantum field, okay? So they're talking about the same thing. The quantum field is the mind of God, infinite possibilities within oneself. So Purusha and Prakriti at its core, as the subject and objects, the subjective and objective is heads and tails. So it's no longer spirit, mind, and body, but mind, brain, and body, which is what's distinguished as life and form in Hinduism and Buddhism. And form is what's called nama / rupa. Because when you're born as a human and you grow up as this human being, when you're born as this human being, you're born as a form of life. And as this human being, this form of life, you're given a name. So as this human, this form, you're given a name. And therefore, that's where nama is rupa, because as this human being, this form of life, you're given a name, which is the prakriti as the field, the neural and physical, the brain and body. The brain-body complex is what's called nama rupa, name / form, where name is form, because as a form of life, you're given a name as a human being. Okay? But in Hinduism and Buddhism, what they're trying to show you is that form as the brain-body complex, prakriti, is essentially what we would call personality in the West, which is appearance. Where form as appearance is actually forming or transforming as appearing, which is reflecting, as visualizing, which is materializing, okay? Where we are the mind as the immaterial being, materializing or appearing as the material universe, all right? Purusha, appearing as all of Prakriti, all right? Which is actually God appearing as man, which is why the Namarupa as the brain-body complex, if we break down form at its most general, form as the brain, heart, and body, reduce the brain, heart, and body to cognition, emotion, and action, which is thinking, feeling, and doing. All right? But at its core, oneself is the immaterial being that is thinking, feeling, and doing things. Okay? All of thinking, feeling, and doing is materializing. Congratulations, welcome to heaven. It's common sense. The universe is coming from you because it's still another kind of dream as a materialization of oneself. The whole universe is your thoughts. Your brain and body is inside of your mind, which is inside of you, just like a dream. So your thoughts, feelings, and actions is you like gas, liquid, solid. It's densifying. It's materializing, which is appearing as the objective universe. The subject appearing as the objective universe. Purusha appearing as all of Prakriti. The mind as the immaterial being appearing as the universe, which is the material body. Life, which has come into form. God has become a man. So form as appearance, forming as transforming as appearing, is reduced to thinking, feeling, and doing, which is personality as behaving. Appearing is behaving as forming or transforming, which is thinking, feeling, and doing, as materializing, reflecting. The mind of God is the mirror of life, okay? So, what that means is that form as the brain, heart, and body, the brain-body complex as form, is not who you are, but actually how you appear. Because appearing is what you do or how you act as behaving. behaving is reduced to thinking, feeling, and doing, which is materializing. All right? So this human being as this form of life is a state of mind where states are actually appearances like outfits, and outfits are behaviors as appearances. So that's why form as personality as behaving, which is thinking, feeling, and doing, as appearing, is transforming as changing outfits. All right? So right now you're currently wearing the outfit of man. So your name is what you're called. Your brain and body as this human being is what you are as how you look. But who you are is life, which has come into form. And as this form, you're given a name, Namarupa, where name is form. So name as form is appearance, not one's being, but one's behaving as appearing, one's appearance. Okay? So there's Purusha and Prakriti as life and form, which is essentially the mind and the body as God and man, which is who you are and how you appear. So you are actually God appearing as a man, who you are and how you appear. Who you are is life. How you appear is form. Form, as the brain-body complex, is how you appear as a man. Form is how you appear. Life is who you are. And that's the distinction of Prakriti, how you appear, and Purusha, who you are. So Purusha means God. Prakriti means man. Purusha means who you are as oneself, which is called Brahman or Atman in Hinduism. All right? Prakriti means man as how you appear, which is Jivatman in Hinduism and Buddhism. So in Hinduism and Buddhism, I made another video on this, and I think I'll end it on this point. In Hinduism and Buddhism, in the mysticism of Hinduism and Buddhism, they're coming from the perspective that the universe is like a play. The brain is a mask, the body is a suit. Form is a costume disguising life within, which means man is a costume disguising God within, where man is the character that God is role-playing as in the puppet show of life, where all of what we call the word in Christianity as God speaking the universe into existence is ventriloquy, where in Hinduism and Buddhism, you have God and man. Purusha and Prakriti is God and man, which is the puppet master and the puppet. The puppet master is both the director and actor. That's where God is Brahman or Atman. The puppet is the character as Jivatman, which is man. So God is Brahman or Atman as the puppet master, the director or actor. Man is the character as Jivatman, which is oneself and one's image as a life form, okay? A mind state. And a state is an appearance as a behavior, because that's what the mind does, is appear, right? Formations are appearances. It's a present tense thinking, which is a materializing as an appearing as a man. That's what the mind is doing, which is the universe, right? So the tree is unified as the trunk, individualized as the branch, materialized as the body or the fruit. Let me say that again. The tree is unified as the trunk, individualized as the branch, materialized as the fruit. The mind is unified as the universe, individualized as the brain, and materialized as the body in the dream of life. It's all a materialization of space, of consciousness, of oneself. Okay? So, this human being as this form of life is a costume. The brain is a mask, the body is a suit. And it's disguising who you are as life itself. Right? This form of life it's a disguise. And who you actually are is life itself. There's only one life. There's only one being appearing as every body. There's only one life living in every form. And that being, that life is the immortal being of eternal life as God, where God is oneself because there is only one self as God. Because there's only one being, one life as the immortal being of eternal life. Who I am, as I am, forever, right here, right now. Okay? So, that's the secret of what Purusha and Prakriti is really getting at, is the distinction between God and man, as the mind and the body, or mind and matter, spirit and flesh, where we're coming from the perspective the mind is the universe. If the mind is the universe, that means there's only the mind. There's no such thing as matter, which is absolute idealism. Well, if the universe is the dream of life in the mind of God, where the mind of God is the mind as God because the mind is God, to say there's only the mind is to say there's only God, which is what we can call extreme theism. Theism is the belief God exists. Atheism is the belief God doesn't exist. Extreme theism, therefore, is the belief only God exists, which is a extreme form of spirituality, and spirituality is an extreme form of psychology. So this is the most extreme form of psychology, which is really just psychology at its core, more accurately, because we're understanding the mind, we're understanding the tree as the trunk, and then it's individualized as the branch. We're understanding the mind as the universe, and then it's individualized as the brain. All right? So in this regard, psychology, it's not extreme at all. It's complete. It's not extreme, it's complete. It's whole, it's perfect. All right? Where you're only understanding, if you're only understanding the mind as the brain, you're only understanding the tree as the branch, which is incomplete. It's not incorrect per se, or if you're to say it's incorrect in the sense that it's incomplete. You have to then take a step back to see, oh, all right, the tree is the trunk first before it's the branch. All right, the mind is the universe first before it's the brain. And then extreme theism as only God, absolute idealism as only the mind, becomes common sense, and it's no longer extreme. It's just the truth. So there's no arguing it. There's no debating it. If you know yourself, and you can only know yourself because there is only yourself to know. If you know yourself because you are who you are, you know who you are because you are who you are. Nobody can prevent you from knowing who you are, because knowing who you are is being who you are. And that's the intuition of self-knowledge as the truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody can prevent you from knowing yourself, because nobody can prevent you from being yourself. Someone can only procrastinate you from knowing yourself by confusing you and making you think you know yourself when you don't. Because that's exactly what it is. You think you know yourself, and you thought wrong. It's when you stop thinking, only then do you truly begin to know yourself. Okay? As that consciousness, this immortal being, right here, right now, not any thoughts, feelings, or actions, not any immaterial objects inside of the brain or material objects outside of the body, but this immaterial space, this immaterial being. And this immaterial space, or simply just this space, this presence, is inner and outer, inside and out. Inner space as the brain, outer space as the universe. It's all the mind as the mind of God is the presence of God as oneself, the immortal being of eternal life. Okay? And that's Purusha. Purusha opposite Prakriti is God opposite man. All right? So Purusha appearing as Prakriti is God incarnated as a man, which is the mind materialized as the body, oneself as the immaterial being appearing as the material universe, oneself as the subject appearing as an object. All right? So I think that's pretty much it. I think we can stop there for now with this video. I think that just about simplifies the distinction between Purusha and Prakriti. So I guess I'll summarize it with this final point. There's two perspectives that you can try and have, but there's only one true perspective. There's only one truth, one correct perspective. At first, you may start by thinking Purusha and Prakriti is the spiritual. Purusha is the spiritual opposite Prakriti, which is the mental and physical. That's when you're coming from the perspective that the mind is the brain. When you understand the mind is the universe and not the brain, or it's the universe first before it's the brain, then the spiritual opposite the mental and physical becomes the mental opposite the neural and physical, because now we're coming from the perspective the mind is the universe. Okay? So I guess I'll end off on this point. Try to understand the mind is the universe. The study of the universe is called cosmology. Okay? The study of the brain is called neurology. When you're born, the universe, which is the mind, has individualized itself as the brain, which means materialized as the body in the dream of life, to use an analogy. How there's only the mind. There's only oneself. There's only God. Now, from that perspective, the mind has confused itself because the mind was initially the universe at first, and then it individualized itself as the brain second, and now it forgot, and it only knows itself as the brain and not the universe. So now the mind has forgotten itself as the cosmological, the universal, and only knows itself as the neurological, the neural. The mind has forgotten itself as the universe and has only recognized itself as the brain. So when you're born and the mind has materialized as the body, which means the universe has individualized itself as the brain, the mind has confused itself as the brain, or only knows itself incompletely, partially, as the brain. So now the mind, which is the universe, has individualized itself as the brain. And now we call the neurological, the study of the brain, the psychological as the study of the mind, because we're confused and we think the brain is the mind. All right? And the mind is only the brain at the surface. It's more fundamentally accurate to say the mind is the cosmological as the study of the universe, which is what we would call the spiritual as the metaphysical, okay? The universal. So it depends what perspective you're coming from. When we see correctly that, in a sense, the mind of God is the mirror of life, the universe individualizing itself as the brain is the mind reflecting itself as the brain, which means the brain is a mirror image of the universe, as what's called a torus, T-O-R-U-S, geometrically, mathematically speaking. So because the brain is a mirror image of the universe, as the mind's reflection, just in the same way when you're standing in the mirror, looking at your reflection, you are not your reflection, but your reflection is you. In that same way, because the mind reflects itself as the brain, when the universe individualizes itself as the brain, the mind is not the brain, but the brain is the mind, which is what makes this experience a paradox or contradiction. So it's not wrong to say that the mind is not the brain, although the brain is the mind, because the brain is the mind's reflection. Okay? So the mind is appearing as the brain, and that's what we would call becoming the brain. And that's how the mind can exist as the brain without actually ever being the brain. And that's where we can accurately distinguish the mental or psychological, not as the neural or neurological, because as we just saw, the mind is not the brain. The brain is the mind as the mind's reflection. So we cannot call the neural or neurological, the study of the brain, the study of the mind, because the mind is not the brain. The mind is only the universe, which therefore makes the mental or psychological only the cosmological or universal. So the mind is only the universe and not the brain. Therefore, the mental or psychological is only the cosmological or universal, which we call the spiritual, not the neural or neurological. So that's why we have to distinguish correctly the neural or neurological as its own independent study, like the physical. And then the mental is its own independent study as well as the universal, as the universe. All right? But to the average person, it's going to be easier and feel more comfortable to just say, well, there's the spiritual and then there's the mental and physical. But it's more accurate to say, no, there's the mental and then there's the neural and physical. But either way, you get the point. That's the two different perspectives of Purusha and Prakriti. Either the spiritual and the mental and physical, or the mental and the neural and physical is Purusha and Prakriti as the subjective and objective. So I hope that helps you guys. I'm trying to speed run through the last bit of this at the end of this video because I want to try to get as much as I can and as fast as I can. So I hope that makes sense. That last bit is definitely going to be confusing. That's going to be for the more advanced seekers. But I feel as though anyone should be able to understand that as long as they think about it for a second. But I gave you guys an advanced perspective on this towards the end there. But I hope that this helps you guys to understand the simplicity and practicality of Purusha and Prakriti as mind and matter. Most people would call it spirit and matter. Same shit. And that's pretty much it. So that's Purusha and Prakriti. So I love you guys, and I'll be back with the next video as soon as I'm feeling inspired as usual.